It's my privilege to be able to introduce Pete. I think one of the wonderful things about, we call this series an adult education series, but really it's a celebration of liberal Judaism. It's not just about education, it's a celebration of liberal Judaism. And what's even more important, it's a celebration of the people who really are liberal Judaism, because there isn't really liberal Judaism that isn't the people. And we had a beautiful celebration of the life and the contribution of Rabbi John Rayner last week from Rabbi, now I was going to say Rabbi Peter Tobias, but it was last week, it was Rabbi Dr. Charles Middleborough who spoke beautifully. If you missed last week's session and you want to catch up on it, I will post in a moment, once I've finished speaking, the link to the YouTube video so you can check out the YouTube video. But for now, I want to just take a moment to introduce Pete. Pete is a colleague who is incredibly dear to my heart. He taught me the ropes of being a rabbi. I was his second year apprentice, the highlight of which was when he assigned me to do a birthday blessing for the children. And the only person who came up was a 91-year-old. And it was planned in typical Pete fashion, so the language was really not appropriate for a 91-year-old. But many of you will know that Pete grew up in Elstree, and he likes to do things in circles. So he grew up in Elstree. He graduated from Leobeck College after being a qualified teacher. Then went to Birmingham Progressive Synagogue and later to Glasgow before he came back to the Liberal Synagogue in Elstree. And the reason I'm saying he likes doing things in circles is that he's back in Glasgow now. So it's wonderful that you can join us from Scotland. I'm not sure, I didn't count, but I think Pete is probably one of our rabbis with the largest number of publications, ranging from what I hope all of you have studied in depth, liberal Judaism or Judaism for the 21st century. It's absolutely essential reading. Of course, a co-author together with Rabbi Dr. Andrew Goldstein of our Haggadah, which we use for Pesach every time, but also some wonderful children's books as well. Rabbi Pete is a regular contributor on BBC Radio 2. And also probably the most creative Jewish educator whom I know. So we're really looking forward, Pete, to learning from you, to learning with you, and most of all, to reminisce a little bit about the life of Rosita Rosenberg. So thank you, Pete, for joining us today, and over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's lovely to be able to be almost in the same room as you, as much as we're allowed these days. And it's a real privilege to be in front of so many people and have the opportunity to share my thoughts and my memories of Rosita. And it really is more about thoughts and memories, I think. And I'm hoping, and you could encourage me, that I won't go on for too long, because what I would really like to do is to allow everybody an opportunity to share their memories. I'm sure we all have many, and limiting this just to mine would be unkind. So I hope that there will be a chance at the end for you to share your thoughts as well. I don't know if Aaron has any particular instructions as to how you want to do that just now, or if you're saving that till the end.
No, otherwise than just please do post your, I was going to put it in the chat anyway, but please do post your questions in the chat, but also any reminiscences. If you don't want to speak later on, it's fine to put your reminiscences in there as well. And but back to you, Pete.
Thank you. Sorry to throw that one at you from all these hundreds of miles away. So here we go. Rosita Rosenberg, Zichrona Livracha. My first encounter with Rosita, or rather her first encounter with me, would have been, I guess, in 1978, when I made my first appearance as a Kadima supervisor, as we used to call them. And I'm just going to do a little bit of screen sharing every now and then, just so you can see what's going on. So there is Farrington's Kadima Summer School from where we were in 1970, indeed from 1973, when I was first there as a kid, all the way up, 1972, all the way up to the 1979. But this was 1978, and that was my first, or Rosita's, as I say, first encounter with me. I've now, of course, lost the ability to get back to the script I've got in front of me. So I'm going to come out of that share. You've seen enough of me there and carry on. So I was a Kadima supervisor, as we used to call them back in those days. It was the middle Sunday of Kadima's epic 2 weeks, when in those days there was an open day and parents descended on Farrington School in Chislehurst to bring their children secret supplies of sweets, asked them how often they changed their underwear, and in most cases undid all our hard work helping them recover from homesickness and obliged us to start the whole process of integrating them all over again. Whether or not 12-year-old Sally Rosenberg fell into that category is not for me to say. But Stanley and Rosita, along with numerous other parents, crammed into the dining hall at the Chislehurst School and listened to me sing a reworded version of Hello Mother, Hello Father, Here I Am at Camp Granada, which, remarkably, I still remember. Some of it went like this. Nice to see you, dearest parent, but you're really a deterrent to Kadima's entertainment. You can go after my pocket money payment. Now, I suspect that had I mentioned this to her at any time during my 18 years at Elstree, Rosita probably would have remembered the words as well. She was certainly a font of information about the various congregations of the ULPS, several of which by that time she had helped to establish in various parts of London and the home counties. I was reliably informed that my irreverent and somewhat is my singing that bad? Somebody muted me, right? Okay. I was reliably informed that my irreverent and somewhat unsubtle welcome to parents went down quite badly with many of those assembled that Sunday tea time. I was not advised what were Rosita's thoughts about this scruffy 20-year-old university student telling her and the other intruders to go away. But if she had been told that said student would one day become a liberal rabbi, indeed her liberal rabbi for many years, she might have been more than a little shocked, as would he, of course, but that's another story. Kadima didn't actually exist in Rosita's childhood. I have to go back to this again, see if it'll do it properly. This is Rosita's childhood. Look at that, isn't that amazing? Isn't that gorgeous? So that's little Rosita there next to her sister. So there's Rosita, and I'm sorry, I'm getting a bit of a problem with this. Going back to my script, I need two computers and I left one of them in shul. What can I do? Okay, so that's little Rosita. Kadima didn't exist in those days. There were, of course, other places to go to for such things in the 1950s, different equivalents. The hair was shorter, the attitude more respectful, but the connections, the conversations, and the sense of community at such residential events created and left their mark on Rosita. Okay, just having, isn't technology wonderful? So we're going to go back to that picture and then we're going to go. So there is Beatrice Webb House. Any of you remember that one? That was a center where all these retreats took place. And that is Rosita in the foreground with those very 1950s looking spectacles. Moving on, there is a picture of an assembled gathering. Many of you watching this evening might even be in there or know someone who's in there, but if in case you haven't recognized her, there she is. That is our Rosita right there. So, so the Beatrice Webb House, a gathering where those connections that I've mentioned, the important part of being in those residential centres, whether it was Kadima in the 70s and 80s or indeed Beatrice Webb House in the 50s, that was where we formed all our friendships with other liberal Jews and our understanding of liberal Judaism and our commitment to it. By her early 20s, after a typical Anglo-Jewish Orthodox upbringing spent mostly in Windsor, from where her family then returned to London in 1951, Rosita had become secretary, then chairman of the liberal youth movement, then known, I am reliably informed, as Flip Jigs. Her introduction to liberal Judaism was accidental. Her parents were concerned about the non-Jewish environment in which she was spending her youth, and they insisted that she should join a Jewish youth club. Apparently, and these are her own words, she tried several, and there were lots in those days, but she found that the boys were only interested in showing off their cars, and the girls were snooty Jewish princesses. Then a friend took her to a group at South London Liberal Synagogue. As soon as Rosita walked in, she had an epiphany. I'm not sure if Jews are allowed to have them, but anyway, she had an epiphany. They were her kind of people, friendly, welcoming, and helpful. She never looked back, making lifelong friends, many of whom were connected with ULPS and liberal Judaism for many decades thereafter. Rosita married Stanley in 1960 at Kingston United Synagogue. Her parents wouldn't allow her to marry in a liberal shul because they didn't think the marriage would be legitimate unless it was in a real shul. Shortly afterwards, they moved north of the river because of Stanley's work and joined Wembley Liberal Synagogue on Preston Road, where, in one of those absurd quirks of Jewish geography, she would have mixed with my grandparents and the first of my ex-mothers-in-law. I'm sure there ought to be a collective noun for those, but I haven't yet come across it. In 1964, Greta Hyman, who was then the organizing secretary of the Union of Liberal and Progressive Synagogues, approached Rosita and asked her to work for the movement at its London headquarters. Rosita's work for and commitment to the liberal Jewish youth movement was well known, and she quickly became a familiar figure at the heart of ULPS, where she would remain for almost half a century, and indeed beyond, as even after her retirement, she was still a source of information and recollection about various stages of the development of ULPS, as well as continuing to serve on various committees. Initially employed for her secretarial skills, which were legendary, Rosita's role was to take minutes of the various meetings at which a variety of aspects of liberal Judaism, its relationship with the Orthodox, the employment of rabbis, the development of new congregations, and so on, were discussed. Although the discussions and decisions were mostly the provenance of rabbis and other ULPS officers, you can be sure that the records of their conversations would have been recorded with great attention to spelling and grammar, no matter how ungrammatically their opinions might originally have been expressed. As the ULPS grew in the 1960s and 70s, Rosita was at the vanguard of discussions with keen individuals who wanted to establish liberal or progressive synagogues in such places as Northwood and Pinner, Nottingham, Bedfordshire, Kingston, and my very own community, originally known as the Stanmore Liberal Jewish Community, which moved into Hertfordshire in the 1970s, just across the road from the woods in Elstree, where I, as a rebellious teenager, used to smoke my cigarettes. So there's the Liberal Synagogue Elstree. Today, I think that's still my name on it there, but back in the day, there were bits missing from it when it was first became what the Liberal Hertsmere Progressive Synagogue, and as I say, just across the road were the woods I used to go to school. Well, not to go to school, skive off school in, to be precise. But that's enough about me. Okay, having helped to establish what would become the Hertsmere Progressive Synagogue, Rosita joined it in 1970, and Sally celebrated her bat mitzvah ceremony from there in 1979. I've got a picture of that. Is there only a maximum of 99 people allowed on this? Because there's some people trying to get in and they're not getting in.
No, there should be 300 allowed.
Okay, well, all right. Okay, so
don't think you're that popular, Pete. You're getting there in a second, but everybody wants to hear about Rosita.
I'm sorry, I'll shut up now. I won't even talk about me.
Good stuff.
This is coming up. This is Sally at her bat mitzvah. I've lost it. Where is it? No, oh, it's gone. Okay, it's not Sally. I've lost that picture. Sorry, everybody. It was all there before. It was all right in rehearsal. Never mind. We'll find it later. Okay. Sally celebrated her bat mitzvah ceremony there in 1979, shortly after I had unceremoniously told her parents to go away from Kadima the previous year. Stanley was one of the many Hertsmere members who rolled up their sleeves to turn a semi-derelict Grade 2 listed building with outside toilets into the synagogue it is now. There are many photographs of those works to which sadly I no longer have access, but the renovation of that building was an extraordinary effort by many volunteers. I don't know exactly what Rosita's contribution was to that effort, but you can be sure that whatever it was, it will have been meticulously and perfectly documented. My continued involvement with Kadima into the 1980s led me to my first face-to-face meeting with Rosita. My attraction to liberal Judaism led to my spontaneously deciding to attend a ULPS biennial conference in May 1983. Then a primary school teacher, I'd just returned from a week's school trip with my class. Arriving back in Oxley on the coach, I jumped into my car and headed straight to the house of Sharon and Andrew Goldstein in Northwood, a short drive away. With my backpack of clothes already a week old, I was given a lift down to a hotel in Bournemouth. I encountered Rosita, as many of us have surely done, in a hotel lobby, sitting behind a long table with folders and name badges. Even as I'm writing this, I've paused to laugh at the mental image of this scruffy, smelly individual presenting himself before Rosita and her faithful companion, Monique Blake, engaging in a conversation that probably went something like this. And you are Pete Tobias. And have you registered for the conference? No. Have you paid? No. I expect it soon became clear that I neither had the wherewithal to pay nor the intention of doing so. I don't know if she recognized me from previous Kadima encounters, but if she did, Rosita resisted the temptation to get her own back from my performance 5 years earlier by telling me to go away. I have little memory of the biennial conference itself, save for the fact that in a kind of action replay of Rosita's experiences 20 years earlier, I got to meet many other liberal Jews, engage in fascinating conversations, and establish a firm connection with and love for liberal Judaism that saw me decide to leave teaching and enter the Rabbi College just 2 years later. I'm not sure I ever paid for that conference. I'm sure Rosita has a note of it somewhere, but it never got mentioned again, so I guess I got away with it. She did get her own back a wee bit at the next biennial in Malvern in 1985. I think I booked legitimately for this one. I arrived at the hotel and was told that as the main hotel was overbooked, I was one of the selected few who were staying in the Overflow Hotel up the road. That was the year when liberal Judaism decided to insist on, or the first year rather, when liberal Judaism decided to insist on a ban on non-kosher food for all the delegates at the main hotel. This edict didn't reach the hotel up the road, however, so the few of us who were there enjoyed what many older liberal Jews will no doubt remember as the traditional ULPS conference breakfast, a full breakfast, full English, on the Saturday morning. To the astonishment of the hotel staff, several more delegates joined us at that Overflow Hotel for breakfast on the Sunday. And I remember when I told Rosita this, she was absolutely outraged that liberal Jews had the chutzpah to go up the road for a full English breakfast. During the 1980s, as I became ever more immersed in liberal Judaism through its education committee and ULPS project days, remember them? Rosita was ever present, interviewing me for the Liabeck College, sitting in on various meetings, casting a wary eye over the various crazy ideas that emerged from me and others in those brilliantly creative days. By the time the decade ended, I was in my final year at the Liabeck College, preparing to take up my first rabbinic post in Birmingham. I remember being at home in King's Langley when I heard the sad news about Stanley's sudden death in 1989. I went with my son Adam, who was just a few months old at the time, he'll be 33 next week, to visit her at her flat in Bushey. It was my first visit to her home. During that brief visit, both Adam and I tried and fortunately failed to tip over the heavy glass top of that stupid coffee table that filled the living room for the entire time that Rosita lived there until she finally moved out a couple of years ago. Rosita came to see me in Birmingham about a year after I'd moved there. ULPS had decided it wanted to set up one of its many attempts to hold on to young liberal Jewish adults. There was talk of it being a group for 18 to 30s or 18 to 35s. As I was almost 34 at the time, I said I was only interested in the latter option. I recall a conversation in Birmingham where Rosita, who travelled up specially for that meeting with Sydney, expressed disbelief that I didn't know how to draw up a budget. I think similar astonishment was shown when I made an identical comment in Elstree some 20 years later. Rosita and Sydney then asked what I might consider calling this new group that I was being invited to set up. There had been various suggestions made. I recall Young Israel being one, somewhere in the mix. But in the end, knowing Jews' love for acronyms and combining that with the improbability of such a group ever succeeding, we decided to call it YMBJ. This caused consternation as people tried to work out what the letters stood for. Y was young and J, Jewish, obviously. But actually it stood for You Must Be Joking, expressing the disbelief that such a group could ever gain traction in the Jewish world, liberal or otherwise. We had a few successful events. I turned 36 and the group came to an end. We were indeed joking. By then, Rosita had become executive director of ULPS, a post which she held for a decade. I bade farewell to Liberal Judaism in 1995 and defected to the other side, crossing two borders, the one between Liberal and Reform Judaism and the one between England and Scotland, from where I'm currently streaming this talk. By the time I returned to my spiritual home in the Liberal fold, Rosita had retired from her role in ULPS. But she was an active figure in the congregation that employed me, the Liberal Synagogue Elstree, that's them. Indeed, she was on the panel that interviewed me for that post. It was the summer of 2002. I'd just returned from a period of sabbatical which I'd spent at a summer camp in California. I was literally on my way back to Scotland. I landed at Heathrow and hired a car to make my way to the building opposite those woods where I'd once smoked my teenage cigarettes over a quarter of a century earlier. I remember the interview well. At the time, Hartsmere Progressive Synagogue gave its entire building over to a nursery, renting the property during the week. The room in which the interview took place had a tiny table in the middle with six ridiculously tiny chairs around it. I lowered myself into my chair and stretched out, a combination of fatigue from the flight and the fact that I'd just spent 2 months in laid-back California. I knew 3 of the 5 interviewers, Rosita included, and considered that I was simply having a friendly conversation with people that I'd seen many times at ULPS conferences, rather than putting myself on show for a job interview. A little bird told me after that interview that Rosita had said that my attitude was so reprehensible that I was lucky to make it through to the second round and that I'd better tighten up my act for the next one. So I guess I must have done. One of the beauties of writing this talk, and I'm setting it out verbatim because I don't want to miss stuff out, is that every time I reach the end of a paragraph, I think back on the episode I've just described and I burst out laughing. And for all her organizational skills, for all her insistence on correct grammar, which I applaud, and for all the authority and gravitas that she was able to display, Rosita had a wicked sense of humor. Whenever I had the pleasure and privilege of sitting with her at committee meetings or adult education discussions or just chatting before or after a Shabbat service, we invariably managed to find something to laugh about. And there were many, many joyful moments. She was a regular and active member of the Liberal Synagogue Elstree's Rights and Practices Committee. Indeed, latterly the meetings used to take place in her flat with that damn glass top coffee table still in the middle of the room. She was a solid ally in all matters relating to the life of the synagogue, and on more than one occasion, when there was a particular crisis relating to an aspect of religious services that weighed me down, she rebuked me, saying, "But you're the rabbi," encouraging me to stand my ground and to acknowledge the authority and trust that people had placed in me. I think it's important for me to acknowledge this evening, that her calmness, her quiet authority, and her keen acknowledgement of any injustice, as well as her unshakable sense of what was correct and what was not when it came to synagogue management and procedure. For reasons best known to herself, Rosita did not bring this skill and knowledge to the Synagogue Council during my time at TLSE. Her input and guidance would most certainly have been appreciated in the past year since she left us. That expertise was called upon about 10 years ago when the synagogue wanted a better understanding of how its administration worked, or rather didn't. Rosita interviewed the synagogue employees, both of us, about our work patterns and how we organized time in matters relating to the shul. She then produced a report on how the synagogue functioned, or rather didn't, and this report included what I consider to be such a wonderful summary of how I worked and still do, that I had it made into a t-shirt. Now here is that t-shirt. She said, as part of her report, he is the rabbi, didn't mention my name, the rabbi is a control freak with an almost complete lack of organization. I have to say, I took exception to the use of the word almost, but what can you do? But then she said, with an incredible level of high quality output. So that's on the back of that t-shirt. And I'm wearing it now, actually, but I decided I'd show you a slide of it rather than the actual t-shirt because it's too cold up here in Scotland to take my jumper off. So those words from Rosita are ones that I still carry literally next to my heart. I've paused again, but this time not so much to laugh, but to reflect with a mixture of emotions. Gratitude for having known Rosita and having been able to turn to her for guidance and support at many stages of my unexpected encounter with liberal Judaism and my journey through it. Pride at being able to say that I've managed to get her to think about her relationship with liberal Judaism in recent years in discussions with my Tuesday adult education group. My latest book, which I wouldn't possibly be so crass as to publicize here, used to feature every Tuesday in our adult education classes, and in fact was dedicated to the group of that adult education group for whom it was presented. Every chapter was written on a Monday, organized, moi, and then presented and inflicted to that group the following morning. And then a quick mention there for the late lamented Rabbi David Goldberg, who, as I say, sadly never got to read the book, but I hope would have approved. But the point about the book for this adult education group was that every Tuesday we would discuss and critique the latest chapter. And many were the valuable insights that Rosita offered. One of the chapters, which I think I eventually called The Paradox of Liberal Judaism, highlighting what I saw as some of the failings and inconsistencies of the movement and philosophy we all love so dearly, had to be rewritten 3 times because Rosita was so upset by the manner in which I'd expressed my concerns about something always so dear to her heart. Of course, Rosita was honored and cherished by the movement to which she devoted her life. One of her many roles was to serve on the committee that decides on those who are going to be honored with awards that are given out at the LJ Biennial to people nominated by their communities as having an extraordinary level of commitment to liberal Judaism. It was a very surprised Rosita, therefore, who at the end of that biennial in 2016 was given an award herself, a lifetime award for her contribution to Judaism. And here is that award for an outstanding commitment to liberal Judaism for more than 60 years and acknowledging a brilliant, insightful mind, wisdom, common sense of humor, deep devotion to Judaism, and I think the English language ought to be mentioned there as well, for Rosita's commitment to that. So that was what Rosita was honored with back in 2016. She knew nothing about it, but given the dedication and hard work that she's put into liberal Judaism during that time, no one else was in the slightest bit surprised, and it was with huge pride and pleasure that those gathered there gave a standing ovation to her as she collected it. In latter years, I was able to be present at key moments in Rosita's life. She celebrated both her 80th and her 85th birthday at the Liberal Synagogue, Elstree. And those were spectacular occasions which were attended by so many of the people probably watching and sharing this evening. So many of you who enjoyed being there on those occasions and remembered so many good times with her. And it was always a joy to see not just the colours, what a combination of colours that is, what with the Elstree Arc and all those clothes being worn by Rosita and Sally, but also the colourful conversations, the people there, the memories that were shared on those occasions on her 80th and on her 85th birthday. There is, of course, so much more to be said. One of my oft-repeated lines after hearing a eulogy read about someone's beloved friend or relative is to point out how impossible, insulting even, that it is to attempt to sum up an individual's life in a sheet or 2 of A4. This is 8 pages and just over 3,000 words, which is pathetic. But as I said at the beginning, I hope that time remains now for many of you to take the opportunity to share your memories of Rosita with each other and with all of us here. We all have them, and they are memories to be cherished as we salute and honor the life and achievement of a true giant spanning more than half of liberal Judaism's 120 years. And that kind of needs an amen at the end, doesn't it? Even though it wasn't a sermon, but let's say an amen. I think that was my little tribute to Rosita, and there she is. And I hope that evokes memories for all of you of time you've spent with her, of events you've taken part in or been present at which she has been responsible for organising, and as I said, no doubt sitting at the entrance at a table, marking you in as you arrive. And I hope now to be able to hand over to you all, whoever wants to say something, and to that Aaron to share that all and listen to your comments. But thank you for listening to me.
Well, thank you, Pete, to start off with. You said that Rosita always brought a smile to everybody's face. Well, you've done that tonight as well, by your own erudition and memories and unique sense of humour, which I had the fortune to grow up with as a teenager. As Pete used to arrive in mum and dad's home for lessons or to write sessions for Kadima, etc. I was just a mere teen. So Pete is just like a big brother to me. And even if he doesn't reply to my texts or messages, you still always will be. And you bring a smile to my face, as I'm sure you have done to everybody's this evening. And it has been absolutely fantastic to hear you speaking about Rosita this evening. Celia remembered earlier on that award-giving ceremony, Celia Naval from France. So many people were touched by Rosita, and were those who stood up for her to honour her and that very, very special gift, which I know meant so much to her as well. Grammar, organisation, humour, smile, kavod harav, honouring the rabbi, and she really did, but also that Technicolor Dreamcoat. Rosita was always Technicolor, and it was magnificent to see that in a fantastic blouse this evening as well, just to remind ourselves, if we could give a dream coat to anybody, Rosita deserved that, that's for sure. But now it's over to everybody to be able to give the opportunity, if you would like, some reminiscences, some memories, some thoughts that you would like to give. We'd like you to keep them relatively short if you can, so that lots of people can speak. But please do raise your hands. You can do that by clicking on the reactions button and waving a hand, and otherwise just waving generally. And hopefully one of us will be able to pick you up indeed. I think, yes, Anne Kirk would like to go first. So Anne, if you want to, oh, there you go. Sorry. You just
I first remember Rosita when she and Greta shared an office at the LJS at the time when she had Sally in a carry cot. And I remember when I went in, if Sally was crying, it was my job to wiggle the carry cot to try to calm down Sally. But the two of them together sharing an office was actually quite an experience, because the jokes that flew backwards and forwards were just amazing, because they were great friends. And so it was a lovely period, and it's a lovely memory.
And it's a privilege to have your reminiscence. Thank you so very much indeed. And what a lesson you could give actually to male MPs today in terms of how you bring a baby into work. Thank you so much indeed. Bob, over to you.
If I could just add to that, that was my first introduction to the union, and I hadn't heard of it. I just, like a very raw little recruit, I joined the LJS. I hadn't heard of the union. To be ushered into that office was an eye-opener.
Fantastic. And if anybody happened to drive into the Montague Centre, I go vote that car park. I mean, it's even worse than it is today. So please do, don't be backwards in coming forwards and sharing some reminiscences as well. I can't see everybody on screen, but hopefully others will help me as well. I'm sure that Dad might want to offer one at some point in time, as others might as well. So David Lippman.
Shirley Lou also has her hand up just for after David Lippman.
So David, do you want to go first and then Shirley? David just needs to... Yeah, now you're okay, we can hear you. Now we can't hear you, David.
Better.
Now we can hear you.
We'll see which is better. Fantastic as ever. I think she was also a brilliant woman intellectually. And my recollection is that she said she didn't go to university because for some reason she couldn't stay on at school, or there were financial implications. I'm not sure. And I'm also not sure, if I remember correctly, that she used to do the Times crossword. I don't know if anybody else remembers that, but my wife and I first encountered her when we were part of the Young Marrieds at Wembley Liberal Synagogue. And of course, that was wonderful. So when I became involved with her again, when I became chairman of ULPS, as it was then, in the late in the late 80s, there was Rosita in her position, and of course Greta Hyman as well in the financial position. Also, who'd been not a member of the Young Marrieds, I think, but known her from the Liberal Shul. And she was fantastic. She was the organizing secretary, then a director and so on, when I was chair. And of course, she was fantastic, grasp of detail, and all the qualities you've mentioned, Pete. But in particular, she was more influential, I think, than other executive directors. Everybody knew her. Everybody knew the warmth of her and the friendliness of her, and found her very easy to talk to chat to schmooze with, on a very informal and friendly and non-official basis. I mean, what a wonderful civil servant in Judaism she was. No organization can have had one who was better and one who was more loved, I'm sure.
Thank you so much, David, and some wonderful reminiscences. And Shirley, I think you have something.
Following on from that, she was so intelligent and she was so knowledgeable. And whenever we had a quiz, if you went and sat on Rosita's table, that was the team that won, and you came away with a prize.
What a fantastic motivation to go onto Rosita's table. Fantastic. But you're quite right. It wasn't just the organisation. It was that intellect as well. And I was a right schnip when I was growing up, when Rosita was the executive director. But her words of wisdom and education, literally for me, not just in terms of how you run things, but Jewishly as well, were absolutely unique, because she had a very Jewish soul and great Jewish knowledge as well. So it was always wonderful to learn from her. So I know others will probably want to speak as well. So please do wave your hands at me, or maybe others have seen your hands.
Tony's got his hand up.
Fantastic.
So good evening, everybody, and what wonderful recollections of Rosita. Pete, thank you so much. I spent 5 years with Rosita when I was chair of the movement and she was the executive director. So I got to know her quite well, and there are so many echoes in what Pete said of how she approached things. But it was one of the happiest times of my life, being involved in the movement, to have such a good partner to work with. And we went through some particularly tricky times, because it was in that period that the old Montague Centre was pulled down. We moved to temporary accommodation and then back into the new Montague Centre. And obviously, Rosita was at the heart of the administration, which played so much to her strengths of moving us out and moving us back again. It was a great time, and I remember her so fondly.
It sounds like we might be able to might need the people like yourself and Rosita as to advise as we perhaps come to another junction in times as well, and to consider all of these different kinds of issues. Who's next? Oh, I can see Simon Bencher. Thank you so much, Simon.
I think I was involved with ULPS, then LJ, whatever it came, pseudonym was used for, what, 23 years in total. A lot of that was spent being told by Rosita that I really did need to brush up on my grammar. My spelling was atrocious. But but I called her the matriarch of liberal Judaism, and I always thought of her in that way. Almost everything that I ever did, everything I ever attended in some shape or form, Rosita was always there in the background. She was encouraging, she was supportive. And as Pete pointed out, she always had that twinkle in her eye and that wicked sense of humor, where it wasn't, probably sometimes it wasn't until 10 minutes later that I realized that she'd actually taken the mickey out of me. But I can think of no one that deserves a tribute such as this more than Rosita. And I congratulate those that have organized it. And it's so fitting. On a personal note, I've just done the typical Jewish thing and had a quick look around all the different screens. It's lovely to see so many people that I've known for so many years, and it's lovely to see you all.
Thank you so much, Simon. It's wonderful to see you as well. It really is. And Harry Hurst is next.
Thank you. Well, first of all, the screen I'm looking at, I got from Rosita when she decided to change her computer about 4 or 5 years ago. She was going to sling it out and she says, Harry, can you take this to the skip for me? I went round there, I said, you're not getting rid of this, are you? She said, yes, you want it? So this is what I'm looking at every day. I've had the pleasure of knowing Rosita probably from about 1955. I was chairman of the Wembley Liberal Jewish Junior Youth Club at the time, and she came along as, I think, flipjig to give a talk to us about, I can't remember, it must have been on how to run a youth club. As you imagine, that goes back a long time. I always remember she was part of it. There used to be a triumvirate: Florence Watts, Valerie Frey, and Rosita Rosenberg, and they seemed to crop up everywhere in liberal Judaism for many years. Pete mentioned Beatrice Webb House. Yes, I'm on one of those photographs as well somewhere. A lot of happy memories of Rosita. Especially when Stan was alive, we used to go around there and have meetings for the social committee. And lovely, friendly lady, correct. She was, when it came to grammar, always knew exactly how to spell things, and always had her, she always tells the story when she went with Stanley once to buy a car, and the salesman kept addressing Stanley about what car Rosita would like and what she was. So, as you can imagine, I think she wrote a letter somewhere stating this. So, Rosita was always very good at writing letters, and very fond memories, and right up to the last year or two when her health was failing. But when we went to see her, always a smile, always welcoming, and even had a go at trying to ride her electric scooter. And I'm not sure it was as good as her driving, but fond memories, and sadly missed by Carol and myself.
Thank you, Harry and Carol. It's lovely to see you as well. It really is. And so I've got Rabbi Ariel Friedlander coming all the way from Italy, I believe, and I've got Val and Paul and others to speak as well.
Yes, hello everybody, or buonasera. Yes, that's 3 years of Italian, that's what it's got me, I can do that. I just wanted to say a couple of words because I was just so fond of Rosita. I have to say that she's more the friend of my parents in terms of being a friend. I believe my parents met at one of those youth, liberal youth organized conference things back in the late 1950s, and there's photographs there with Rosita and my mum and my dad in them. And then when my dad came to Wembley to be the rabbi there, I think that they also crossed paths. So she met me first when I was 2, and I can't quite remember that exactly. But well, I just wanted to say, when you were saying about her being the matriarch, on the one hand, I mean, we and I had our birthdays were one day apart, and especially after the start of Facebook, we always exchanged greetings and caught up, and I heard all about what Sally was doing. And So we had kind of like that kind of a regular contact. The last memory that I have, really, yes, as a matriarch and kind and funny and this and that, I just have this really clear memory of a biennial where somebody brought up in the main meeting the discussion of whether or not liberal Judaism and Reform Judaism should merge. And various rabbis were standing up saying, over my dead body, this, and suggesting the opposite point of view. And when everybody sort of just was getting so terribly emotional, she just stood up and told everybody how it was and what was going to happen and calmed everybody down and sorted it all out. Basically drawing on her memories. I was there at that meeting. I remember Sidney Brichter said this, and so said this, and this is what is going to happen. And all these other people who we all look up to because of their experience and their gravitas and everything, just basically when Rosita spoke, they listened, they calmed down, and they sat down, and we went on and continued. And there weren't that many in those days strong female figures in our movement who really were visible and had that kind of respect. And I really think that, certainly for me at least, in the liberal movement, she may not have been a rabbi, but she certainly was somebody who made me feel it was possible that I too one day could have a place in liberal Judaism. And so that's a legacy from her for me, as well as missing all of the lovely, funny exchanges that we used to have.
She's got as a name AJ Friedlander, but we know her as Rabbi Ariel, and we're delighted that she's serving in Italy at the moment and to be part of our conference of liberal rabbis. It's wonderful to have you here this evening. Val Dixon. Hi, Val.
Hi. Thank you, Pete. It was a lovely dissertation, if you like. But I remember Rosita as a very good friend who loved to play Scrabble, who loved to go to the theatre, as well as being totally involved with liberal Judaism. And it is Rosita we have to thank for our congregations in Peterborough, in Hereford, in Norfolk, and in many other places. And I remember when we were founding these, of us all going up there and sort of doing the publicity and then just meeting all the people who are now, many of them, leading and taking part in the administration of those congregations. So, it's a huge thank you to her, and we do miss her so much.
Thank you, Val. Absolutely wonderful to hear from a dear friend of hers as well, and someone who shared so many conferences with her, so many different events. Thank you so very much indeed. Paul.
Okay, I've actually put a little story onto the chat that I thought I would chip in here. Penny and I went to our first LJ conference, or UOPS conference, back in, it must have been around 1980. We had a really wonderful time, left our kids with some friends, and we had a wonderful weekend off, good discussions, etc. And it came to the plenary session at the end, when it became very apparent to me that the organisers, whoever they were, had engineered the whole thing to come out with a result that they wanted. And I thought the whole thing was a real carve-up. And I stood up and said so. 2 weeks later, or thereabouts, I was sitting in my office at Marks and Spencer in Baker Street when the phone rang, and Rosita was on the phone. I said, "Hello, Paul, how are you?" "I'm fine, thank you, Rosita, how are you?" "Would you like to come and have lunch with Sydney and me?" So I said, "Why?" She said, "Oh, we'll tell you when you come over." So I went over this sumptuous sandwich and water lunch at Montague Centre with Sydney and Rosita. And they proceeded to offer me the role of organising the following conference. So I thanked them very much. I bought a little time and said, "Let me have a think about it." Decided that discretion was the better part of valor. I had 2 young daughters, very young daughters at the time. I was traveling abroad a great deal, and I really didn't have time to take on a commitment like that. But I have to say that Rosita was incredibly determined. She spotted a gullible person who might have taken it on and tried. But anyway, I greatly respected her for the work that she was doing and how she was trying to draw people in me into the organization of liberal Judaism.
Thank you. And I would never call you gullible. As your son-in-law, I would never dare do that. But actually a genuine liberal Jew as well. And it's so wonderful for us all to be showing these memories. It's also wonderful to see people, Hilary from Bedfordshire and Nick in Edinburgh, people from so many different communities, as we said, from Dublin, from France, from Finchley, well, all around our communities, just celebrating Rosita's life this evening. Daniela, I don't know if you want to speak, Rabbi Daniela. Your piece in the chat is absolutely fantastic, but if you want to just speak it as well, it'd be lovely to hear your voice.
Did you mean me?
Yes.
Oh. No, I just posted my memories of Rosita. And strangely enough, they overlap Pete's, because 1978 was my first year at LBC. And I met Rosita then welcoming students. And she was, as I said, she welcomed me like an old friend. And then later on, when I served Bristol, where Isabel was a member, she always engaged me in great chats. And yeah, right up to the end, the last time I think I met her at North Finchley at the memorial concert for David Jacobi. And that was the last time I saw her, unfortunately. But yeah, she was a lovely, welcoming person. And she and Monique were absolute wonderful people to have in the office whenever one popped into the Montague Center in those days.
Thank you.
Remember that very, very well.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Daniela. Let's go over the channel, shall we? The C, David and Hilary.
Oh, right. Hello. I remember the first time I met Rosita, Joan Finkel and I had traveled over in the mail boat, which was a horrible crossing, to the conference in Nottingham. And we met David Lippman. Well, I met David Lippman for the first time, and it was very enjoyable. But I met Rosita then, and of course, on many of her visits to Dublin. And she was always great fun and lovely. And Joan and John Finkel and Rosita and Stanley, and you know, everybody got on so well, and it was really nice. And when we had one of the inter-visits, or one of our special celebration weekends, and I took them on a bus tour. I took all the visitors on a bus tour around Dublin, and you know, there were such nice comments, and we went to the Jewish Museum and various other things. But Rosita was just lovely, and I don't really have any more to say, but she was lovely and we loved her. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you very much indeed, David and Hilary. It's wonderful, and we'd love to all in the Dublin and progressive Jewish community as well. Dad.
Well, I've been waiting, and I think I can echo almost all the tributes people have made, but I'd like to start with a tribute to Pete. It makes me realize what we're missing. To see you go across the border to Scotland and to the other movement, and then to leave us for California. We wish you well in both of these places, and we hope that you'll find a way to still connect with us. I mean, after all, you've been taking services for California for a couple of years now. Keep in touch, Pete. Just talking, seeing you there and reminiscing, it's been just great. And I think that's the other thing. I looked at all these screens like other people have done, and it made me realize what a wonderful family liberal Judaism is. And for those people who are new to us, I hope that it wasn't too much of an in-crowd talking, but we certainly are a large in-crowd. I have to say, for me, Rosita, right from the time that I went into her office in 1965, before going to Leobeck College, was always supportive. I can't remember any time when she was not supportive and went out of her way to help me, and I'm sure other rabbis. She was able to, I won't say tell you off, but advise you very carefully when she felt she could be doing better. I think all rabbis felt like that. I never heard of a rabbi in all these years who had anything bad to say about Rosita, and I'm sure that was true of lay people. Somebody mentioned crosswords. I do remember at our rabbinic Kala, because our annual retreat, Rosita used to come along, and she was treated like a fellow rabbi. She was just part of the crowd. But I do remember she sitting with John Rayner at breakfast, each with a copy of the Times, and there would be a competition who could complete the crossword. I can't remember who won, but they eventually would have a discussion over one clue that neither of them could get. And it was such an intellectual discussion. I didn't even know what they were talking about, but there they were. She was on a par with John and could follow on. A number of times you mentioned Sydney. I'm not sure if all people realize that was the late Rabbi Sidney Brichter, who was the executive director for 25 years, but she was always his Sydney's sidekick. It's often been said that Sydney had all the ideas, but Rosita did the work to put them into practice, and I'm sure that was right, and I have evidence of that all along the way. And she had that ability to, and I've written that on my bit of paper, to gently upbraid Sydney, or to cover up for him when he had his Boris moments. And sometimes Sydney had those, and she would be there ever loyal, but with a way of papering over the cracks. And I think my final, I could say much more, but I give time to other people. I think my final thought is, Rosita was there for I suppose, much of the 25 years as Sydney's support and secretary and so on. And then when Sydney retired, the question was who would take over? And it was a very brave move by liberal Judaism, but also by Rosita to take on the task. Sydney had been a powerful figurehead and a powerful rabbi, well known in Anglo Jewry and a place. And here she was, a woman taking over from a rabbi. And I do remember on a number of occasions, she was just as much at home as Sydney was, with the chief rabbi, with the Archbishop of Canterbury. And she did the job brilliantly. And it was a wonderful thing that she could take over and hold her head high, and did a wonderful job for liberal Judaism. So Rosita, very much part of my life, and Rabbi Pete Tobias, you're also very much part of my life. And thanks for the talk, and we wish you well in your future in California.
Thank you. Am I able to steal this from Aaron now? Because it feels like we've it's 8:30. That felt kind of like a wrap, didn't it? But I want to have the last word because I started. And I just want to say on a not just, obviously this has been about Rosita, and Rosita for both you and for me, Andrew, has been a major figure in our rabbinate all the way through, as have so many of the people on this screen at the moment, and many more who aren't here with us today. And so as you started framing it, it occurred to me, yeah, this is kind of a farewell for me to the family too. And you guys, sorry, really have been a family to me for all these years. So unfortunately, I won't be around on the 20th of March for Rosita's memorial L Street, at least not in person. Maybe I could zoom in from California if it was at a sensible time of day. But this feels like the goodbye that I've wanted to say for a while. So thank you to Aaron, to Charlie, to Leah, to Liberal Judaism for asking me to give this talk tonight. It's been an honor and a privilege both to remember Rosita, but also to remember it in your company as well. Remember her in your company as well. So thank you for that opportunity. Thank you for all the opportunities over the last however many years.
Mhm.